Okay, hi everyone. I'm Mallory. As you know, I work for WWF Forest Forward, which is WWF's corporate engagement program for forest projects around the world. So we specifically partner with private sector actors, either directly managing forest, sourcing from forests, or investing in forest landscapes around the world. And we have a new tool through the Explorer.land platform called Forest Forward Investment Opportunities, where we're trying to showcase some of our more community-level forest conservation projects in order to connect them with investors. So the project I'm presenting today on behalf of WWF Uganda is one of those projects on the platform. So today I'm talking about forest landscape restoration in the Albertine Rift in Uganda. Don't have a flyover. Okay, so looking at the landscape. So this is part of the wider Albertine Rift landscape, which is this massive, biodiverse, amazing forested landscape, which was featured in the video you've just seen now, so you have an idea of how beautiful it really is there. It's over 1,000 kilometers. It covers 8 countries in Central and East Africa. And it's an amazing place for endemism, just the sheer number of species living here. So over 50% of birds, 39% of mammals, 19% of amphibians, and 14% of reptiles and plants that are found in all over mainland Africa occur specifically in this landscape. But it's also one of the most densely populated areas of Africa. So especially Uganda, the population is exploding there. And so with that comes all sorts of challenges in terms of forest deforestation and forest degradation. So it's unsustainable timber extraction, general forest clearing, and especially clearance for agricultural land, grazing, hunting, firewood collection. So it's the kind of things where it's those communities living on the periphery of forests or in forests themselves. When they're pushing against those forest boundaries, these are the kind of issues you see with forests, as we know. So against the backdrop of those challenges, WWF has been working in this landscape since 2014. And they've gathered a number of lessons learned for what actually needs to happen in this landscape to enact change. So in the 2 sub-landscapes of the Albertine Rift, there's a lack of organization at the community level. So there are a number of timber cooperatives, but there aren't enough, really. And so that's the kind of bottleneck that's going to stop investment from coming into the landscape, because it gives money somewhere to go when these people are organized into cooperatives, when they're able to get a better business sense of how to manage timber resources, agroforestry, that kind of thing. And there's a need to support private sector and market-driven conservation in the landscape. And creating cooperatives on the ground is one of those first steps that we need to be able to do that. Also, improving efficiency through technology. I think this is one of the most interesting challenges in the landscape. Wood is coming out. There are timber plantations there. There is agroforestry on small scales. Wood is coming out of there, but it's low-quality wood. So it's unprocessed, round timber logs, and then the actual transportation out of the landscape is really difficult. So there's an underdeveloped rail system. The roads are really bad. You can transport timber across Lake Victoria to Tanzania, but really, it's not anything that can happen at scale. And so one of the key interventions, I think, that can happen in that landscape is bringing that kind of innovation within the landscape where they can start producing different products, diversifying, and that way it gets easier to move products out of there too. So using plantation forestry and agroforestry specifically in the buffer areas around protected areas, that's the kind of intervention that we all know well with forest conservation. So those communities that live there, they need to be able to meet their economic needs, their material needs, and increasing plantation forestry in those areas specifically can help protect and strengthen the buffers around those key protected areas and central forest reserves. And piloting sustainable financing mechanisms. So in a few panels back in this room, there was a really interesting question about where do we need to be between that kind of traditional philanthropic grant-based funding versus full investment bankable projects in the landscape. And I think this landscape specifically is at a really interesting inflection point between those two. So WWF, obviously, you kind of associate with that kind of going in grant-based projects. We've been doing that in this landscape for a while, and we've built these lessons learned specifically so that we can move to the next step. But I think sustainable financing, especially, is so key when it comes to things like timber plantations. When you have to talk to communities about a 20-year life cycle, we need mechanisms for funding where a community can know what that kind of long-term money situation for them is going to look like. It can't be dependent on these kind of traditional grant funding cycles. So what is the vision moving forward for Uganda? It's 10,000 hectares of degraded natural forest restored, specifically in protected areas and central forest reserves. 14,000 hectares of sustainable timber planted in those buffer zones, and specifically strengthening cooperatives, because that's how we're going to keep money flowing into those plantations, agroforestry plots. We need cooperatives so that that can be efficient and that all of those cooperatives can work together to benefit from economies of scale. Increasing economically viable yield of timber to 1.5 million cubic meters. And it's not just about volume, it's about quality, like I said. Once you start to increase that quality, really so much flows from that. Another really interesting point is that Uganda imports a lot of those semi-finished wood products like veneer and plywood. And a lot of that comes from illegal timber in the DRC next door. So once you start to build up that domestic sustainable timber supply, and even doing simple interventions like putting a sawmill in the landscape, really it can be even more about the national economy and the international economy, so trade with other nations in East Africa. Creating 4,000 new jobs in the landscape specifically, reduced incidences of things like landslides and encroachment on the parks, 2 million tons of carbon sequestered over 20 years, and strengthening those cooperatives on the ground. As I said, they're really key to building up the timber industry in the country. And that will then enhance further investment into the landscape. We're looking for 5 million euros over 5 years, and it's building on already existing efforts in the landscape to take those first steps toward creating bankable projects and the necessary enabling environment for that. And it's also building on existing private sector funding in this kind of work in the landscape through WWF. And it's about financial returns through carbon, but really through this new Forest Forward platform, we're really looking for the kind of investors that are interested in looking beyond financial and carbon returns, because it's really about the biodiversity and ecosystem services and social returns as well. So that's the kind of landscape approach that we're taking, and that's the kind of investment we're looking for. In terms of monitoring, we're building on pre-existing remote sensing monitoring for the landscape, and specifically partnering with cooperatives and communities on the ground to involve them in biodiversity monitoring and carbon. That's, in a lot of the projects I've worked with WWF, that's really a key element, because it builds that kind of stake in the biodiversity of the landscape. When people are the ones responsible for paying attention, seeing what's happening, they really feel like they have a part in the future of that biodiversity. So what are the big scale impacts of what we're looking to do in the landscape? It's all about protecting the natural forest, really. That's the heart of what we're doing. It's looking at the mountain gorillas and wanting them to stick around, So all of those interventions really are steps toward protecting that natural forest. It's empowering communities to manage their plantations, creating cooperatives from a bottom-up approach, really. I think the last panel had a lot of interesting discussions about the problems with top-down conservation, and really empowering communities to do this work on their own is about being able to, in however many years, take a step back and say, it's yours now. It's not about us. And promoting local value addition through diversified products. I think that's really a really interesting intervention that can open up so much for the timber industry in Uganda. As I said before, so this is part of the Forest Forward investment opportunity tool. We are promoting some of our community-level forest conservation projects around the world, connecting them with investors, like a lot of the people here. And this is actually the only one of our projects that's led by a WWF office. All the other ones are private sector led. And you can find us on the Explorer.land platform or forestforward.panda.org. And this is me in Uganda this year, learning about honey very up close and personally. So yeah, please feel free to reach out. Please chat while we're here. I'm always around. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mallory.